This is the first in a series of stories told by my granddaddy, a great man who continues to be great into his 95th year. I like to think I got my knack for storytelling from him. 1934 was a different time, not just in Savannah, Georgia, but in America. We didn't have many luxuries back then, or much optimism for that matter. Not when we were in the midst of the Great Depression. I was 10 that year and a product of this pessimistic era. At the time, I lived with my older sister, Helen. She was a nurse down at Candler Hospital, and a self-made woman through and through. Even with the age gap between us, she had no problem letting me stay with her after our parents passed. Like a guardian angel, Helen protected me from the real horrors out there. At least when I was with her, I never felt threatened by the rampant poverty or crime. Of course, that didn't mean I had it easy. None of us did then. Even at the tender old age of 10, I was a newspaper boy. The pay was okay, and the Savannah Morning News let us paper boys work around our school schedule. But still, the job was tough. This was a far cry from the idyllic suburban stereotype of a young boy riding his bicycle and tossing headlines to smiling neighbors. No, I was stuck in a much rougher district, Harris Street, a working-class neighborhood full of mostly blacks and immigrants who were new to the city. My friends and I ran Harris. There was me, Colin, John, and Ricky. Colin was the youngest and a real wise guy. He had Irish blood like me, only Colin looked the part more with his red hair and scrawny stature. Loud and obnoxious, John wore glasses and was our comedian. He was constantly cussing and getting in fights. But Ricky was our undoubted leader, our captain. Ricky was 13, so he was a little older than the rest of us, a little taller and a little cooler as well. He'd been in Savannah his whole life and knew the city better than our resident hobos. Ricky was a good-looking kid, muscular and charismatic. With straight brown hair, he had an electric smile and a soulfulness to those dark eyes. But more importantly, he looked out for us like a supportive older brother, or like the father we never had. If it weren't for Colin, I, Tommy Brennan, would have been the runt of the team. I didn't have strength or a tough guy attitude. Instead, I had to rely on my own ingenuity to stand up for myself. But I worked hard. And above all, I was just glad to fit in with the guys. Just glad to have friends during these rough years. I was pretty clever, if not exactly a whiz kid. I guess I wasn't a bad-looking boy. I did my best to keep my thick black hair combed to the side, emulating the likes of Clark Gable and Gary Cooper, even if I was half their size. Helen always told me my blue eyes, boyish grin, and dimples would make me a hit with the ladies someday. And I guess she was right when I married my wife, Carolyn, 15 years later. But in 1934, having friends and bonding with them meant the world to me. I just wanted their respect, especially Ricky's. And so I worked hard out on Harris Street. Regardless of how scrawny I was, I could bark out those headlines with the best of them. And I always kept my pocket knife on me. A sharp blade good for cutting strings off the bundles, or perfect for protection against some of the rival paper boys. But through it all, I felt safe, or at least around my friends I did. We had a buddy system after all. Plus, it's not like the cops would have helped us four working-class punks anyway. The police were far from a friend for anyone on Harris. This was 1934. Yeah, it's not like none of us were aware of murderers, robbers, or child molesters, or all of these other dangers. It's just no one wanted to talk about it. We didn't have 24-hour news stations preaching safety to us back then. Nor could we afford to let paranoia stop us from trying to make a living. We didn't have the time or energy to worry over real-world horrors. During the Great Depression, we were just trying to survive. However, the constant struggle didn't keep us from having fun. I still had a blast growing up, especially with my gang. And around October, we got ready for one of our favorite events, the Fall Carnival. Fresh off seeing King Kong the previous weekend, which scared the hell out of all of us, by the way. Our excitement only grew higher. Saturday soon arrived, and like caged animals released into the wild, my friends and I raced down to Savannah's fairgrounds on 10th Street. The carnival our escape from school, the hard work, and the stifling depression itself. We entered the abandoned lot, and its sprawling array of tents and small rides. Whatever corners the carnival's signs and lights couldn't get, The nearby streetlights certainly did. The cool weather perfect for our thin jackets. The atmosphere electric. Live music and bands surrounded us. Like attending Romeo and Juliet at the Globe, the carnival's aura enchanted everyone. Even through the lingering sense of cigarettes and cheap booze, the sheer smell of fresh sweets caressed the soul. I felt the communal bond, an organic joy missing from our everyday struggles. My buddies and I rode the Ferris wheel and the wooden roller coaster. We even won a few funnel cakes playing some of the games, and as the night wandered past 10 o'clock, the carnival's ambiance remained festive, comforting even in the cold. When Colin and John set off for the House of Mirrors, Ricky convinced me to stay behind. He had other plans, more adventurous plans, so the two of us walked off toward the back. Ricky in his patched-up gray jacket, I in my wrinkled red one. Together we made our way to the end of the fairgrounds, far from the families, far from the treats. The band music faded away the closer we got to the final tent. A blue tent isolated on its own. Dark woods ran behind it. Ricky and I stepped into this world of sleazy carnival barkers. A new soundtrack of seedy jazz music greeted us. No longer were we around the pleasant locals. Instead, we were amongst the outcasts of Savannah, Georgia. The gangster types, the hobos on a diet of cigarettes, and a few black couples too drunk to stand up straight. Every one of the customers dressed in their Sunday clothes for these Saturday night sins. Uneasy, I looked over at Ricky. "Are you sure we should be here?" I asked. Ricky grabbed my arm. "Come on, chicken," he teased in a southern drawl. I had no choice but to follow Ricky, but I trusted him. He was our leader, and above all, Ricky was my best friend. Nothing was around the big blue tent except dirt and a couple of exotic girls' tents off in the distance. The area's dim lighting further quashed the cheerful mood we'd enjoyed on the other side of the festival. The two of us stood with this unsavory congregation at the front of the tent, right before a large podium. Looking around, I realized Ricky and I were the youngest ones here, not to mention the only ones without a cigarette or alcohol in their hands. Trying my best to be discreet, I leaned in toward Ricky's ear. "Is this the freak show?" Ricky finished nonchalantly. Smiling, he squeezed my shoulder. "It's your turn to see it, Tommy." A suffocating dread eviscerated me. I got a bad feeling. My eyes scanned the scene, but there was no way I could avoid that blue behemoth. To leave now meant having to run away in front of everybody, including Ricky. I couldn't afford to look chicken in front of him. "It'll be fun," Ricky continued. For once, I didn't say a word. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want my trembling voice to reach Ricky. I held my hands together in an effort to hide the shivers. This wasn't the movies where we could hide under the seats during the scary parts. Right now, I'd have to face whatever lived inside that tent. My task for toughness forced me to confront the freak show. I noticed a small wooden sign hanging on the tent. Amidst splashes of many colors, its bold font stood out. Reverend Rob's Shock Museum. Soon, two men walked to the podium. One tall and slender, the other a stocky bald fellow with a wild beard. The tall man was dressed in a black suit. He had the style of an undertaker and the exuberant smile of a used car salesman. A long cane accentuated his showmanship, his black preacher hat lending him an authority that was anything but evangelical. On the other hand, the man's friend was a complete slob. His hideous flannel shirt and coveralls would have drawn disapproval, even in the Great Depression.
"Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, for the wildest show you'll ever see,"
The tall man barked in a gruff voice. A few of the other patrons whooped with glee. The smell of booze now joined the thickening cigarette smoke. Restless, I kept stealing glances between the Shock Museum and conglomeration of rides, safety, and innocence lurking behind me. Ricky grabbed my hand, but not even his supportive smile could alleviate my unease. Using his cane, the preacher man motioned toward the sign.
"Tonight, I, Reverend Rob, will show you the wonders of my journeys." The souls I've discovered from South America all the way to the Okefenokee.
He leaned in closer, his baby blue eyes holding us captive to each and every word.
Come see the Shock Museum. Come see the strange beings only the good Lord himself could have imagined.
With theatrical gusto, he pointed the cane toward the tent entrance.
Join me in this experience.
Inside, the tent opened up into an area of scary spectacles, each corner literally covered by one of Rob's mysterious exhibits. A few openings in the very back led off to separated areas. I figured they were rooms for Reverend Rob's crazier discoveries. Everything from the carnival was hidden behind the Shock Museum's dark confines. Even the smoke and smells were gone, the vibrant jazz now replaced by a tense silence. With just a few lamps scattered about, I felt like I was in a haunted castle or crypt, rather than the Savannah city limits. Confused, Ricky and I followed the crowd to the first exhibit. The spot looked filthy, with only sharp wires forming a makeshift barrier. I turned to see the stocky farmer closing off the entrance. He flashed me a quick glare, a spit of tobacco from his lips, the only hint I needed to stop looking at him. Guiding me, Ricky pushed our way for a view. Then a gurgled caw shattered my senses, like the sound of a dying bird gasping for a desperate last breath. Everyone jumped back in fright. Terrified, I jammed my hand into my pocket, straight toward my trusty knife. Ricky grabbed my arm. "Hey, it's okay," he said in a calm tone. One look at his sympathy cooled my nerves. The older brother I'd never had rescued me once more. As excited murmurs replaced the cawing, I followed Ricky, all the way to the very front of the crowd, and then I came to another scared stop. I let go of Ricky's hand. I did my damnedest not to scream. To my relief, I heard the other customers gasp. One man cried out like an old Sparky victim. This first exhibit was no mere warm-up. In fact, what I saw was grotesque, monstrous, disturbing. There, behind the chicken wire, was a young woman, or at least what appeared to be a deformed woman. Her legs were skinnier than sticks and shorter than twigs, but the rest of her was normal-sized. Normal except for the feathers stuck to her white dress and pale skin. The woman's face was squished together like melting human slime, her mouth distorted, the lips protruding to form a vivid lipsticked beak. The woman's stringy hair stuck straight in the air to form a blonde comb. With the speed of rolling marbles, her blue eyes scanned the crowd. They latched right on to me. Leaning forward, the woman stretched those skinny, pathetic arms out to me, her fingernails sharper than a bird's talons. And when she released another painful caw, I about collapsed in fright. A fountain of saliva flowed from the lady's beak, her animalistic cries like the howls of a lunatic, trapped in an asylum, halfway between deranged woman and aggressive bird. She clenched her fingers over and over, clamoring for my flesh. The woman's body couldn't move. All she could do was wobble back and forth like a broken jack-in-the-box. Her blue eyes burrowed deep into my soul. Ricky pulled me back before my tears started falling. "Hey, it's all right," he reassured. Even with the other customers watching me, all I could feel was the woman's glare, and all I could hear was her continual cawing into this late fall night. Her voice got strained to the bone, unable to project any emotion amongst the pain.
"That's enough."
A bark interrupted the woman's hollow cries. At Reverend Rob's command, the woman went silent. Her blue eyes looked over at his stern face. No mercy anywhere on the Reverend's expression. Like a frightened child, the woman's tiny legs shook. Everyone else became quiet. Rob had our undivided attention. With his typical flair, Rob pointed his cane at the small sign in the corner of the pen. "The Chicken Lady of Chattahoochee," the sign proclaimed in painted exploitation.
"This here's Chicken Lady. Found her in Florida,"
Rob went on, his tone now boisterous rather than strict, back to being a minister rather than a cold carny.
"I rescued her down by the Chattahoochee River."
Battling my inner dread, I looked behind me. I saw no sign of the fat man. The farmer was gone.
Oh yes, she likes it here.
Rob went on. He flashed a smile at the woman.
Ain't that right, Judy?
Like a deranged dog, saliva still dripped down Judy's face. She kept her distance, kept her silence.
Just follow me, folks.
Rob bellowed. He led the crowd over to the next exhibit.
The Shock Museum has no shortage of stunning sights.
Judy's wounded gaze froze me in place. I could hear the crowd leaving Ricky and I behind with the Chattahoochee chicken lady, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. "Tommy, come on," Ricky whispered. Ignoring him, I kept my sights on Judy. Even from here, I could see her scrawny legs strain to stagger toward us. Her disjointed mouth struggled to move. The cawing only became more guttural, more desperate. I reached out toward her. Vague hope sank into Judy's wide ocean eyes. "Shit," I heard Ricky cry. Then Judy's hope vanished. She stumbled back with pitiful speed, immense fear making her clumsy.
Come on, son.
The familiar voice hit me like a sucker punch. A tight grip ensnared my shoulder. I whirled around to come face to face with the good Reverend.
There's much more I want to show y'all,
Rob's voice said, behind a barely suppressed anger. "Yes, sir," I said meekly. "We're sorry," Ricky told Rob. He wrapped his arm around me, taking up for me as he always did. He just wanted a better look. A wicked smirk crossed Rob's face. His grip loosened, but his glare never left my young face.
Well, no need for that.
He pointed toward Judy. By now, she'd cowered up into a corner, like a scared animal burying itself in the darkness. Only Judy had nowhere to hide.
Judy's just fine,
Rob said, his attempt at sympathy about as convincing as his purity.
She don't get lonely here, I promise.
Worried, I stole another look toward the pen. Judy kept staring at me. Her mouth quivered, but couldn't utter a cry for help. Those thick feathers wouldn't even allow tears to stream. From there, the show got even stranger. 15 minutes went by in a series of escalating chills and darkness. Sure, there were your usual freak show attractions. A hulking muscle man with arms bigger than anchors. An old woman billed as the Witch of Waycross, who couldn't have been younger than 115, judging by the layers of wrinkly skin and patches of cobweb hair. But the most frightening to me was another blue-eyed woman here at the Shock Museum, a teenage girl Rob kept in a small pen. Behind oversized teeth, she yelled out over and over again, her manic hands constantly at war with the dirt and her own skin. She was the last of the Aztecs, the pinhead of Panama City. The woman had a pretty face and smooth skin, but her head was much smaller than the rest of her, as if a doll head had been placed onto a fully grown human body. She was the inverse of the chicken lady. The pinhead had no hair. She uttered growls and grunts from pale, chapped lips. Old bloodstains and dirt her makeup. The multitude of scars her jewelry. She wore a tattered, polka-dotted dress she'd long outgrown. Like a confused puppy, Pinhead's baby blue eyes faced us. A long tongue dangled out of her mouth in between the nonsensical vocabulary. A tongue of many bleeding cuts. Rob kept her biography brief, and then before she could come any closer, a quick whisk of his cane sent the pinhead retreating to the darkest depths of her cage. The crowd had no time to react. Rob was an expert at transitions, and his next display was a doozy. Naked Amazonians, both men and women. Excitement pulsated through the male and female customers. Ricky's eyes beamed like headlights. For a preacher man, Rob sure knew how to capitalize on the sexual cravings of each gender.
Come witness their exotic beauty,
He shouted, with enthusiasm to spare.
The beautiful models of the Amazon right here in Savannah, Georgia.
Rob pointed towards the first room in the back. Ricky and the others beelined towards the tantalizing spot. Begrudgingly, I followed after them. Rob's swift hand pulled me back.
No can do, son,
He said with subtle scorn. What? I replied in a trembling voice.
You're too young, son.
Panicking, I looked around at the chuckling crowd. Even Ricky joined in on their laughter. Rob motioned toward a sign by that first entrance, 13 and older to enter the Amazon.
I'm afraid you'll have to wait here, boy.
Rob continued. I confronted his glare. But I don't want to. Ignoring me, Rob led the customers inside the room.
Come on in, folks,
He yelled out.
Follow me to the Amazon.
No, I shouted. Upset, I got ready to run right into that jungle. Ricky grabbed my arm. Hey, Tommy, relax. No, I want to go, I said. A combination of therapist and older brother, Ricky leaned down. Look, we'll be right out. His relaxed demeanor somehow talked me down. I promise. I looked over at the Amazon opening. You just want to look at those girls. Chuckling, Ricky gave me a playful hit on the nose. Hey, can you blame me? Even I cracked a smile. Look, I'll be right out, Ricky went on. He backed away toward the first room. Just wait right here. Yeah, I said. Folding my arms, I watched him scamper off toward the crowd. I'll bring you back when you're 13, Ricky quipped. With that, he disappeared inside the room. Immediately, the loneliness sunk in like an early morning fog. My fear returned, especially once I realized I wasn't alone. Far from it. Manic mumbling pierced through the silence. Alarm bells rang through my head. Turning, my quivering eyes drifted back to the pinhead's cage. There the aberration was, the teenager on all fours and leaning up against the wiring. Pinhead's tongue dangled out, an added taunt to go along with her assault of strange snarls and cries. Her blue eyes latched onto me. I stood frozen in fear. Sure, I was sympathetic to her plight, but I still didn't trust the teenager's motivations, or her sanity for that matter. Then, in a sudden burst, she stuck her hand through the wire, a desperate, hungry reach for me, her snarling wilder and more frenetic. I turned and ran towards the rooms behind me, all while Pinhead's anguished growls followed me, her snarls reminiscent of a starved wolf on the prowl. The unsettling noises stopped upon entering the third room. Now everything was quieter and darker. This cramped space only had one lamp, my only guide in this wilderness of weirdness. Aside from scattered crates and boxes, I saw a tall bookshelf standing to my left. Rows and rows of jars populated the shelves, light glistening off the glass like glowing radiation. The jars all held the same abstract figures. Entranced by the sight, I staggered up to the shelf, and then I came to a frightened stop. Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure what was in those jars. I just knew they weren't animals. Not the small furry roadkill I expected as another gross shock museum novelty. The figures were smooth, their little arms and legs like antennas sticking out of molds of flesh, their angular heads and narrow eyes underdeveloped like the rest of their bodies, malformed like so many of the people I'd seen in this museum. Deep in my sickened gut, I knew what these beings were. Even in the gooey liquid, they had a clean radiance, bodies untouched by the sins of the world, fetuses that hadn't been corrupted by the Great Depression, but had never survived to experience it either. Dozens of the human fetuses stared back at me, preserved like exotic specimens. I realized this freak show had taken a disturbing turn, from the big top to the laboratory.
Hey!
A high-pitched voice whispered to me. Startled, I turned to see a little boy standing in the shadows.
What's your name?
He asked in a kind tone. Fueled by curiosity, I approached the child, and the closer I got, the further away from the lamp I became. I could tell the boy was close to my age and scrawnier than me. He wore torn jeans and a white undershirt, no shoes on those bony feet. Dirt covered the boy's pale skin and decorated his dark hair, but the filth couldn't mask his vulnerable blue eyes. The combination of his mischievous smile and untidy appearance reminded me of a Charles Dickens kid, like the boy had been transported from a British orphanage to a Georgia carnival. Tommy, I stammered out. Stopping in front of the boy, I was relieved to see no deformities or dry blood. He was normal enough, if pitifully malnourished.
Tommy,
The boy beamed.
I'm Terry. Our names sound the same.
His wax smile never wavered, and neither did his bright blue eyes. Yeah, that is funny, I said, too nervous to grin. I looked over and saw a coffin positioned against the wall. The open lid revealed a male mummy, his arms crossed. Not a dusty, crumbling corpse either, but one as well preserved as those fetuses. The mummy's wrappings a pristine white, his posture one of a regal statue. Oh wow, I exclaimed. Excited, Terry took a step toward me.
He's real too. Daddy got him in Cairo, Georgia.
The Shock Museum lived up to its name. Stunned, I faced the boy. Your dad? The kid snagged my arm in a tight grip.
Yeah, he said I can pick anyone.
His smile leaned in closer, the boy's voice full of so much innocent exuberance.
I want you, Tommy.
I struggled to pull away from him. The boy was stronger than I ever thought, much stronger than me. No, let go of me, I yelled. Terry pulled me in closer.
Don't you want to be my brother, Tommy?
Horrified, I yanked my arm back. No! With soft footsteps, the kid cornered me back against the wall, right by the mummy.
I already have a mama and a sister.
The boy gushed.
Mama's from Chattahoochee. She's really something.
My body pressed into the tent's harsh fabric. Leave me alone, I hurled at the kid. Get your ass away from me.
What did you say?
A gruff voice barked. A bright light blinded me. Reverend Rob wielded his lamp through the darkness. I saw the tall man stop next to Terry, Rob's glare contrasted by the child's wide grin. Their blue eyes formed an intimidating double-bit axe, and under the lighting, their resemblance was uncanny. Shock Museum's resident father and son. Like a cornered crook, I trembled beneath that spotlight of a lantern, jammed my trembling hands in my pockets.
That's him, Daddy.
Terry yelled.
He's the one I want.
Rob ruffled his hair.
We'll get him, son. Don't you worry.
Driven by childlike wonder, Terry stared right at me.
We'll be brothers,
he said with pride. Terry then held up his shirt. A gaping crater of flesh covered his hip. The tapestry of dried blood, stitches, and exposed muscle ran all the way down to his ass. A streak of scarred skin ready for a teammate.
We'll be twins, Tommy.
Rob cracked an evil smile.
The Siamese twins of Savannah.
Helpless, I couldn't even scream. All I could do was stare at their hungry blue eyes.
I can already see it.
The Reverend continued with reverence.
Y'all will be the stars.
Terry pulled on Rob's jacket.
Terry and Tommy, Daddy.
Rob faced the boy.
Yeah, son. I told you I'd give you one, didn't I?
With a cold smirk, he confronted me.
And I always keep my promises.
Like a kid waving me outside to play, Terry motioned toward me.
Come on, Tommy.
He grabbed the side of his chest, the vicious wound.
Now we'll be blood brothers forever.
I fell further back against the fabric, further into these depths of dread. The cold air lent me a battalion of chills, and my hands hid even deeper in my pockets. Gripping the lantern, Rob marched toward me.
You'll be fine, boy,
he said to me in a playful taunt.
You'll be a star like the rest of my family.
Panicking, I stumbled over into the mummy. In a disturbing resurrection, the mummy let out a muffled yell. His arms flailed about in a stilted frenzy. Saliva drenched through the wraps and snared around his mouth, muffling his cries. The man yet another prisoner of Rob's museum. Screaming, I jumped back. I saw the mummy couldn't see. He could barely move. His arms grasped for help in agonizing fashion.
You little shit,
Rob yelled. Lunging out, he slammed the coffin lid shut, and just like that, the mummified man was silenced. Behind scared eyes, I watched Rob reach toward me, until my right hand felt a wooden handle. Old Reliable was right at my fingertips.
I got you, boy,
Rob shouted. Terry jumped up and down, his energy renewed after all his years of shock museum loneliness.
Get him, Daddy.
With fierce force, Rob snatched my shoulder. The pocket knife always made me tougher, and tonight was no different. Like I was back on Harris Street, I retrieved the blade and swung it at Rob. I got him good. One hard lick across the face. Rob cried out as a bloody line appeared on his cheek.
No, Daddy.
I heard Terry cry, his voice now imbued with a temper. Desperate to escape, I pushed Rob away and bolted straight for the entrance. Behind me, I heard Terry's screams ring out like a young banshee's. Waves of broken glass became a backdrop to his tantrum. I stopped near the opening and turned toward the scene. Like a shattered aquarium, busted jars floated amongst the ocean of dark liquid. The small fetuses nothing more than bobbing dead fish. A sterile smell disgusted me. Leaning against the shelf, Rob's irate glare zoned in on me.
Come here, boy,
he yelled. Terry stood in a dark corner, his outburst now driven by rage rather than excitement.
He'll get you,
he screamed at me. I looked on at the boy's blue eyes. Without the smile, they looked sharper than daggers.
Just you wait,
Terry continued.
Daddy always gets them.
Crying out, Rob careened toward me, his steps heavy and ferocious. The lantern light splashed across my fear.
Come here,
the Reverend hollered out. Clinging to my beloved knife, I ran through that dark tent. Adrenaline warmed me from the cold, but couldn't stop the constant shivers. I saw none of the other customers around, not even Ricky. Through the horrific journey, I wanted to close my eyes but couldn't. The shock museum sprawled out before me. There was Terry's pinhead sister, the elderly witch, Rob's grotesque wife, Judy, and their incessant screams swirled all around me, their haunting chorus like a prison of desperate animals crying into the night.
Come back,
Rob growled behind me. His footsteps grew louder, closer. I couldn't slow down. I couldn't stop, even when I ran out into the cold late night. More lights had gone off since Ricky and I first entered the shock museum. I stumbled through this ghost town of a carnival. There was no music, no more agonizing screams, and most of all, no footsteps hunting me down. "Ricky!" I yelled. I saw him waiting for me just a few feet away from the big blue tent. Ricky recognized my panic. I told him everything, and he believed me once we saw the weird farmer emerge from the shock museum. The man's intense gaze recognized us through the darkness. His movements swift and violent, like a beast created by Reverend Frankenstein.
Hey!
His rugged voice shouted at us. I could now see a long machete dangling from the man's hand. The few lights around us glistened off its pristine blade. I pushed Ricky toward the way we came. We ran all the way, never stopping till we met John and Colin in town. Of course, they didn't believe us, but that still didn't stop Ricky and I from trying to talk to the police.
Damn hooligans,
the officer scolded us. His dismissive wave shot down any chance us working-class delinquents had with the coppers. And I guess I couldn't blame them. The Savannah police had their hands full at the time, and my story was so wild. I'd never get the chance to prove it either. By the following morning, the fall festival was gone with the night. Soon enough, the Great Depression came to an end, but the nightmare was far from over once a bigger horror emerged: World War II. I joined the service immediately. By then, I'd grown from a timid runt into a strong young man. But deep down, I'd never shaken that fateful fall night in 1934. I'd go on to see terrible things in the war, and more terrible things in life. But over 80 years later, those shock museum memories linger in the mirrors of my mind. The fear of that night remains, especially when little Terry promised me that Daddy always got them.
Hey guys and ladies.
Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Send your story or creepypasta to the email in the description. My shirts, Patreon, Instagram, and Twitter are down there too. Anything you do to support the channel would be much appreciated. Whether it's liking, subscribing, or donating. This story was written by my buddy rhonnie14. And he's a good writer, as you can tell. It's nice when you don't have to edit on the fly. I mean, it was a long story. There was a lot of editing. But it's just so nice when things are written well. So anyway, go check him out. He's on Reddit. His username's in the description. So that's about it. Be good to animals, even people. Sit.
Ja, snämmar, björksbus, rish.
I felt like I was in a haunted hassle. I felt like I was in a haunted hassle. A work. Okay, come up here and lay down.